All right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dory Dalton. Welcome to the Plan Unit Preserve presentation. I'm your wildland specialist and firefighter for the Genesee Fire Protection District. I'm also a community member here in the foundation. This evening, you're going to hear from Brian Mallett from Open Space. He's Open Space Manager, Nancy Balter and Becky Smith from Genesee Fire and Safety Committee. Chris Garlesko, also from the Genesee Fire and Safety Committee, will be moderating. Our presentation is recorded and will be posted for later viewing on the Genesee Fire Rescue and Genesee Foundation websites. We've set aside an hour and a half for this presentation. You will be muted during the presentation, but please put your questions into the chat box as they come up for you during the presentation. The chat box will be monitored and we will answer your questions at the end of this presentation. Okay, there we go. All right, so what is a CWPP? So this is our Community Wildfire Protection Plan, and we updated the district's plan from 2008. It was an 18-month project that was completed in April of 2021 in partnership with the Forest Stewards Guild. This is a tool for Genesee Fire Rescue, land managers, residents, and HOAs to help prioritize projects to make our district safer and more prepared for wildfire emergencies. Please remember that this project was a snapshot in time, and there is data that was collected by driving all the roads, and there was a general on-the-ground assessment of risk factors. So we modeled the potential wildfire behavior under the 60th, 90th, and 97th percentile fire weather conditions, and these are conditions that occur in our district 40%, 10%, and 3% of the days between June and October, the period we used to associate with large fires in Colorado, and this data was taken from 2009 to 2019. The weather parameters we talk about came from data collected at the Lookout Mountain Remote Automatic Weather Station and fuels moisture conditions from Fire Family Plus. We want you to know that red flag day warning means fire weather conditions are present and include warm temperatures, very low humidity, and stronger winds, and they're expected to combine to produce an increased risk of fire danger. So the higher the percentage, the higher the fire danger. The 97th percentile fire weather conditions modeled in the CWPP would qualify for a red flag warning. And they're similar to conditions that occurred during the Elephant Butte fire in July of 2020 to the southwest of our district. Genesee Fire Protection District experienced 5 red flag warnings in 2019, 16 red flag warnings in 2020, and during the 2021 season, there were 3 red flag warning days in November and 4 in December. During that time, there were multiple wildfires, including the most destructive wildfire in Colorado history on December 30th. The conditions used for the 90th percentile fire weather scenarios would constitute a red flag warning day only if widespread thunderstorms were predicted for the area with possibility of lightning strikes. Conditions used for 60th percentile fire weather scenarios have higher fuel moistures and lower wind speeds. All right, so as you look at this slide, you can see the map of the entire community. Your plan unit is the plan unit outlined in this dark black. It's white. Okay, so this is where you would find your plan unit. Okay, and let's see here. The plan units were created along HOA boundaries and property boundaries with considerations of roadways and topographical features. So there are 3 ways that wildfires can reach our home. The first on the left is radiant heat, and radiant heat is the energy that is transferred through the air to other objects when materials burn. If a house receives enough radiant heat for a sufficient time, it will ignite without flames contacting it. Sometimes radiant heat can break the glass and windows, allowing windblown embers to enter the house. Even if the radiant exposure isn't large enough or long enough to result in ignition, it can preheat surfaces, making them more vulnerable to ignition from exposure to flames and embers. Even vegetation and other fuels located away from the house can pose a threat. On the right, you can see the example of the windblown embers. And embers are the most common cause of home ignition. They're light enough to be blown through the air and can result in the rapid spread of wildfire by spotting, in which embers are blown ahead of the main fire, starting other fires. And then the bottom, on the right, we have direct flame contact. And this is when fire reaches your home through the tree crowns or along the surface of the ground to your home. All right, so here we have the hazard ratings. And again, your plan unit is outlined in the dark black. Before I explain your hazard ratings, you need to understand that the entire Genesee Fire Protection District is 95% more likely to have a wildfire as compared to the rest of the US. This puts us at an extreme hazard rating. The ratings of the different plan units are relative to one another, and they're based on 4 variables. And the first variable I'm going to explain is the fire risk. Okay, and again, you're highlighted in the dark black here. Okay, this is going to be based on fire behavior, and this fire behavior includes the weather, the topography, the fuel in the area, and the location that your plan unit is in. Okay, and this, your rating for this is red, which represents a high rating. And then the next variable would be suppression challenges, and again, it would be based on behavior, fire behavior, and challenges that could arise getting equipment into your area. So it's important to remember to clear that roadside vegetation, and the optimal driveway and roadside clearance would be 13.5 feet high by 20 feet wide. And those are based on Jefferson County recommendations and Genesee Fire Rescue apparatus size. And again, your plan unit was rated in the high category. The third variable would be your evacuation hazard. Again, you can see that you are in the high risk category, again, based on fire behavior. Thinking about where you're located in the community, the visibility on the day of an evacuation, the width of the road you're trying to evacuate on, the type of evacuation notice we get, which means is the entire community evacuating or just part? Are you exiting while resources are entering and we just have two-way traffic? All right. Are you located on a non-survivable road, which Brian will go into more detail in a little bit. So again, it is a high risk rating. And then the last variable I'd like to talk about is your home ignition zone hazards. And those would include your roof, your siding, and your defensible space. And remember, defensible space is that 100-foot circle around your home, or it could extend out to 100 feet, 150 feet if there's a slope involved. Defensible space is the buffer you create between your home and the grass, trees, shrubs, or any wildland area around it. This space is needed to slow or stop the spread of wildfire, and it helps protect your home from catching fire, either from embers, direct flame contact, or radiant heat. Proper defensible space also provides firefighters a safe space or area to work in to defend your home. We, the firefighters, have to have space around your house to make a stand to prevent fire from reaching your house. So think about your house and your defensible space. Would we, the firefighters, be able to defend your house without putting our lives at risk? We'd like to see fire on the ground in mitigated areas where we have a chance to stop the fire and not allow fire to go up the trees and go from tree to tree because trees are too close together, dense, or have ladder fuels under them. We cannot fight fires in trees. And once again, you do have a high hazard rating. With the variables combined, your overall hazard rating is considered high. All right. So as you look at this slide, these are the risks that were identified in the CWPP. You can see the bullets. It shows you that you have houses situated on steep slopes with forest below. There is some defensible space around some of the homes. We can see that. Many of the private drives are long, steep, and narrow, and there's not adequate turnarounds for firefighting equipment. Almost all of the homes are at risk of short and long range spotting from embers. About 65% of the unit is at risk of passive or crown fire activity, and these are based on your 90th percentile fire weather conditions. Okay, so on this slide, I'm going to talk to you about flame length and crown fire. Your plan unit is highlighted in blue on this slide. Here it is on the flame length side right here. And with the color of your plan unit, that goes down here along with a hand line will hold, and that's if the flames are less than 4 feet. All right. So again, the modeling for these was based on the 90th percentile fire weather. And the majority of your plan unit is that peach color. So that means fire will most likely be controlled with a hand line under the conditions modeled. Equipment may be needed if flame lengths become greater than 4 feet. When we look at the crown fire side, again, you're highlighted in this blue, and you can see that the majority of it is the orange and the dark yellow color. Again, 90th percentile fire weather conditions modeled. So it shows us surface fire and passive crown fire, which means the fire is spreading due to surface fuels. like bushes, grasses, or other small trees under the canopy. And patches of stands torch due to the fuels below the trees. Okay, again, Genesee Fire Rescue will fight the fire until the fire behavior makes it unsafe for us to do so. All right, so here I have a couple of photos of neighborhoods that were obviously destroyed by fire. The photo on the left is a Waldo Canyon neighborhood that was destroyed by embers. You can see again that the trees around the houses, they're not destroyed. They're scorched by the fire because of the houses, okay? Remember, embers can travel long distances from vegetation and nearby homes, all right? And again, embers have been shown to travel over a mile. During East Troublesome, an ember made it over the Continental Divide. So on the right, this is one of the neighborhoods destroyed in the Superior wildfire. And these were destroyed due to embers and radiant heat. And information that's come out since that fire has stated that the 0 to 5 defensible space would have helped. Okay, and now this is a property that you can see that survived the Cold Springs fire in 2016. These property owners participated in a home assessment program that's offered in the Boulder County. This particular homeowner focused on defensible space in zone 2, which is 5 to 30 feet from your home. And what they did for their defensible space is they broke up the continuity of the fuels. They have healthy tree spacing. So please remember, there are steps we as homeowners can take to help lower our risk, and in many cases, our neighbors' risks as well. All right, so some of the things that we can do, we can have space between the trees, right? Recommended spacing is 10 feet between crowns. And when we talk about that, we don't mean the top of the trees, we mean the most outer branches of the trees, okay? 10 feet, and then more if you're on sloped ground. And then limbing, limb your trees up at least 6 to 10 feet from the ground, or a third of the total height of the tree, whichever is less. And then all of this information is based on the Colorado Forestry guidelines. All right. You've heard me talk about fire going up into the trees, and that's due to ladder fuels. So it's recommended to remove the ladder fuels so that there is nothing underneath. This tree has been limbed and the ladder fuels have been removed from underneath the canopy. And then the picture on the right shows the zone 2, the 5 to 30 feet. It's recommended to mow your grass to 4 inches. This is the area that is called lean, mean, and green. This is where we want to break up the continuity of trees and shrubs to allow that fire to slow down, to be on the ground. All right. So this slide is going to show you your home exposure risk, okay? The top slide is the 90th percentile weather. The bottom slide is the 97th percentile weather. Your plan unit is outlined in black, okay? And the risks we're talking about are influenced by overlapping home ignition zones, potential exposure to short and long range spotting from embers, and potential exposure to radiant heat due to the fuel around your home, all right? And as you look at the 90th percentile, almost all of your homes in your plan unit are at a moderate risk of those things I just talked about under the 90th percentile weather conditions. When we move down to the 97th percentile, here we have about half of the homes move up to the high risk, and about a quarter of the homes are at an extreme risk, okay? All right, so I'm going to show you some examples of some defensible spaces from your plan unit. Oh, not yet, one more. So here are some simple things that we can all do, some places to start for our home hardening and our defensible space. We can make that 5-foot perimeter with no vegetation. I highlighted it on the slide. That's the most important spot. That's where you start. You start in that area next to your house out to that yellow line, okay? Remove the pine needles from your roof and your gutters and all those tricky little places on your roof. Take the flammable materials from beneath and on your decks. Get those out of the way. 80 to 90% of our houses ignite due to embers rather than radiant heat. When you consider replacing the materials on your home, the outside of your home, use fire-resistant materials. All right, so here's some examples. And the houses have been blacked out. So all three of these photos show houses, different houses. And the reason that they're on this slide is because of the fuels right up next to the house. You know, we've talked about radiant heat. Windows are our most vulnerable point, okay? And you can see exactly where those windows are located. These are conifer trees or firs, I don't know, Brian can tell you, but you know underneath those trees, there's dry needles, okay? So these trees, they need limb definitely, but it's the radiant heat from this that really concerns me, so. Okay, now on this slide, the top two photos, you can see wood piles. All right, here we have a wood pile right next to the house with some long grass. And here we have a wood pile underneath two trees. Okay, so it's recommended. We know that wood fire piles can easily ignite from embers or surface fires, and they're going to emit a significant amount of heat or direct flame contact that could ignite your home. So the recommendation is to move the firewood pile at least 30 feet from all structures, but then you have to ensure that there's at least 10 feet of clearance between the piles and all of the trees, okay? The bottom two pictures, they both have mulch, okay? Mulch is not recommended, it's highly flammable, so you definitely don't want mulch in your 0 to 5 space. A lot of people are replacing it now with rocks, crushed granite, etc. And then the timbers, you know, they're not right up next to the house, but if they're in that 0 to 5 space, you can see if embers land here and they have that opportunity, right, to just sit in here and smolder, it can go all the way across to this right here and then go to the home. So the recommendation for the timbers, well, remove the timbers, but that's not always, you know, something that's cost efficient or whatnot. So if you're unable to remove the timbers, then clear the vegetation at least 5 feet out from the timbers to prevent surface fires from spreading to the home. So not only would you not have any mulch here, right, you'd also want this area not to have anything so that the surface fire couldn't come through the grass all the way up to your timbers, okay? All right, so on the left, you'll see there's 3 pictures of decks. Okay, so first of all three of these decks have grass growing right up to the edge of them, all right? Flammable vegetation, when it's on fire, it's 2.5 to 3.5 times the height of the original, whatever it is. So imagine that. And then the circles are showing you cushions that have been left out, right? It's easy to leave a cushion out, right? I mean, we think it's winter, but remember that we just had a major fire at the end of December. So if you're not using your cushions or anything flammable, you should take them inside, okay? And then the bottom picture right here with this arrow, this is pointing to lattice, all right? Again, the long grass, it's on fire. It goes right up to the lattice and acts like a wick, right? Right up to the surface of the deck, which leads to the joists, the supports, right to your home. So remove the lattice would be the recommendation. So, and then the picture on the right, I included this one because I can see a driveway here. I'm not sure if it's a driveway or a road, but again, if this thing's on fire right next to this road, this tree needs to be limbed with the limbs like this all the way down to the ground. I'm guessing that it hasn't been raked underneath there. So there's going to be a lot of dead pine needles, right? Pine needle litter, right? And those are the things that are really flammable. So, all right. So all of these photos on this slide have some good examples of some ladder fuels. Right here, we have these bushes, we have this tall grass leading up to this tree. Okay, so again, we remove the ladder fuels below any tree that's in our yard that we consider a keep tree. Okay, middle picture, the same thing. Look at all the different levels. And this looks like this could be a seedling tree that maybe grew on its own. It looks pretty crowded. It doesn't look like it has enough space to grow up and be healthy. So again, right up next to the house. This house has the tall grass. We want to make that 0 to 5 space. All right. Down here, It looks like we have a garage and a house, or it could even be two houses, but the trees go from one side to the other. That's continuity, right? That's a wick. That's a wick from this side all the way to this side. And there's definitely not 10 feet of crown spacing in that row of trees there. All right. On this slide, here we have I think it was a juniper bush. Please remember, juniper bushes are really flammable. Again, it's right up next to the house. We have some trees right up next to the roof. And this one is definitely in the 0 to 5 space. It is recommended that trees be limbed up at least 10 feet off your roof. Okay, it's not the tree trunk that's going to burn. It's all these pine needles, right? That's what becomes flammable. And just think, any tree that's not in your 0 to 5 is less pine needles getting in your gutter, getting on your roof, and that you have to clean up. All right. Now this house, you know, they have a really great start at their 0 to 5. I don't know if that's exactly 5 feet, but look at that. That's rock. Their grass is short. Okay. And then they have the rock. So that's a great start. Somebody's got a good start on their defensible space. Thanks. All right. So I'm the person that you contact if you would like to have a home assessment. All right. I come out and I assess your home ignition zone and your defensible space. And it's available for all of the community members. Once I do that, you receive a report with mitigation recommendations and photographs. It is about 25 pages for real. Just so you know, you own the data and the report. It's not shared with insurance companies. No one can call me up and ask for your report. Again, your report is stored on a server offsite, so it's not subject to any freedom of information request. It's a certified program. So if that's something you're interested in and you follow all of the recommendations, I come out and look at it and you can receive a certificate. And people ask me, well, what's that good for? Well, you can show your insurance company you're making some efforts. And also it's a really great selling point because people call all the time and ask the fire department to come and write them a letter. We don't do that. So you can contact me. You can see my contact information is right there, or you can go to wildfireprepare.com to fill out the application. The cost is $100. And just so you know, that the program, the money that's collected goes towards other wildfire education programs, programs, wildfire education literature, and other mitigation initiatives. So I will share that information with you again in a link at the end. So don't feel like you have to frantically write anything down. So I have to stop sharing and let Brian. All right, Brian, it's all you.
Great. Set up my PowerPoint here. Okay. So my name is Brian Mallett. I am the Open Space Manager for Genesee Foundation. And I forget if Dory mentioned this, but if you have any questions, put them in the chat box at the bottom when you think of it. So then we'll address that question at the end. Okay, so just talking quickly about open space and what I do in Genesee Foundation Open Space. You can see a lot of what I do in the open space management plan, and that's on our website, and I do one every year. And so I have one, and I made a presentation to the community for this year's. In there's a lot of good stuff about what we're doing on trails, noxious weed control, erosion, things like that, and then a lot on forestry. And a lot of the forest work that we're doing that has been done over the years and that we will be doing in the upcoming years is grant funded, but that grant funding actually doesn't go towards the roadside thinning, which is something that I'm going to talk about. But a lot of the acres that we do is funded. So just, I know there's a lot going on this map, but I like maps, and I think it's sometimes helpful for folks to see what we're doing over on out on open space. And so I've got the preserve outlined there just for reference. And then if you look towards the top right, I call this the choke cherry management area. So that's a big area we're going to be working in. We already started there this year, and we'll hopefully be finishing it in 2022. And the reason why we're working there is because, as you all might know, and we talked about this on our walkthrough, the top left over here, the ski hill, that's one of the highest risk areas according to the CWPP. So adjacent to it is some open space. So that's why we're working there. And then also in the orange is some of the roadside thinning that I have planned. This is just everything here, all these shapes are on open space. That's the only place that I work, is on the open space. And so a lot of roadside thinning planned for this year and next year route. Down in the center of Genesee, these are some larger forest restoration, wildfire mitigation areas that we'll be doing. And then later on 2023 through 2025 is the plan. And then over to the west, there is Genesee's western border. For those that have lived here for a while, you might be familiar with the ranch over here, the Ralston Ranch. They own about 250 acres. Not much of it has been treated, and our prevailing winds come from the southwest. So we usually talk about fire coming from the southwest. So doing a little bit of a lot of mitigation on our western border is something that I prioritize. And again, all these shape files are open space. So mitigating roadways, it is a priority for the Genesee Foundation to work on those major roadways. I know our CWPP had pointed that out, that our egress route needed some work, and we only have one. Obviously, we've known that for a while, and that's my plan for this year and next year to do what we can on open space. And then there's a lot of mixed properties there. So there's open space, and then there's a lot of private property that mixed in there. And so if I know preserve isn't necessarily what I'm talking about when I say the major roadways, roadside thinning, but I do talk to folks out there, and I encourage them when they do a defensible space to think about the evacuation route, not just for them, but also for their neighbors. And this doesn't necessarily apply to the preserve, but for folks elsewhere in Genesee, they live next to Genesee Foundation open space and their defensible space project. And there's just some ARC processes to go through there. And in general, the ARC has been a lot more open to removing trees, a lot more open compared to the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so working on even making that process easier for folks, and expanding the open space manager authority to allow folks to remove trees without going through the ARC. So that's coming up with more policy updates. And everything that I talk about on this presentation, that Dory's talked about in this presentation, and that we talk about in our walkthroughs, it's based on the best available science. And a lot of that comes from Colorado State Forest Service. That's the home ignition zone guide that we handed out to everybody. And that's always being updated. And the trend of the update is generally less flammable vegetation around your home. And what I mean by that is, even 5 years ago, the State Forest Service was a bit more flexible on, yeah, you could have this juniper bush up next to your house. Maybe you shouldn't, but it's not that big of a deal. Now it's an absolutely, no, you really shouldn't, because that's the thing that could burn your house. So that's always being updated, and that's the direction it's going. So when we talk about fire, we always talk about hoping for the best, such as the Elephant Butte fire, which was here in Evergreen. That's where I live. And no structures were burned. It was only 50 acres. It was very close to a dense area, but nobody was hurt. No structures were burned. But we have to plan for the worst, which is Cameron Peak fire, and now the Marshall fire, which 1,000 structures were lost. So again, when Dory and I come out to talk to you in person, and we talk about tree removal and home hardening, we're planning for the worst case scenario. And sometimes I'll have folks say to me, literally, if it's going to burn, such as their house, why should they do anything? Well, there's 3 reasons you should do something. One, for the benefit of the firefighters in Genesee and any other firefighters that are going to come in. So if they're coming in to protect your home, you should do your defensible space. That's your responsibility. You should remove that juniper next to your house. You should trim up those trees along your driveway so that they are not ladder fuels and that they're not going to block firefighters in or prevent them from getting in. The second reason is for your neighbors. We have a lot of overlapping home ignition zones. If you remove a tree on your property, it's improving the defensible space of your neighbor's property. And thirdly, and also along, forgot to mention for evacuation route purposes as well. If you remove, and I'll show you some photos on this, but if you remove trees that are along your evacuation route, or if you at least trim them up, you can prevent them from burning when you are trying to evacuate in that most opportune time. You don't want that tree to burn. And then thirdly, you could save your home, you could save your neighbor's home by doing something as simple as removing a cushion off of your deck. That's an example from California. Of course, that's just like one isolated example, but a home did burn. It was more of a dense WUI, but a home did burn because the couch on the back deck caught fire from embers, and then it ignited the home and so forth. It's a domino effect. So doing those things that Dory's talking about can literally save a home. It's not guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed. We live in a very high risk area, as we all know, but doing something should be a priority. So non-survivable roadways, this is from the CWPP. I'll just read the first portion of it. It's portions of roads adjacent to areas under severe fire weather conditions. So Dory talked about what severe fire weather conditions are. And just to note, we talked about this in our walkthrough too, flame lengths. So it talks about 8-foot flame lengths or greater. Flame lengths are typically 2 to 3 times the height of the fuel source. So if you imagine some tall grass that's 2 foot tall, they could be 4 to 6 foot tall flame lengths coming off of that grass. And off of that one blade of grass, it's not going to be very long. It's going to be pretty quick. But if you imagine a whole field, or then you start thinking about bushes, if the bush is 3 foot tall, then you're talking 6 to 9 foot flame lengths. And then you start thinking about trees on fire. If a tree is 30 foot tall and the wind is blowing horizontal versus vertical, then you have 60 to 40, 50 foot flame lengths going horizontal across your road for a short time, but that could stop you from getting out. So drivers stopped or trapped on these roadways would have a low chance of surviving radiant heat from fires of this intensity. So where in the community were these identified? So on the left is the larger picture. You can see a lot of these areas in the west and the southwest of our community. It's the preserve area, not so much. And you all probably know this because you don't have a lot of areas where you have trees hanging over your roads. You do a lot of driveways, but on your private drives, which is, you know, the roads you all drive on to get out of there, not as much. There's a few identified areas, but again, they're mostly close to driveways is what it is. And I'll also say these were identified via a model, and the model is not always correct. It's not always 100%. So I would say probably up towards the north up here, you would definitely get some 8-foot flame lengths as well across the road. So what are we trying to avoid? All this stuff that I'm talking about. These are real scenarios. These are all from California. The bottom left one is from the Paradise fire, which is becoming more common, but the Paradise fire was extreme. I think it was 10, maybe 20,000 structures were lost. There were a lot of lost homes in the Paradise fire. So this was a common scene that came out of this fire, was people having to drive through fire to get out of their neighborhood. And similarly here on the right, fire trucks having to drive through fire to either save themselves or try to save somebody else. That's what we want to avoid. These are the worst case scenarios that we're seeing more and more often in these fires. So these are some photos from the preserve. So a lot of this is a mix of private property and then the preserve common open space. This bit here, I think it is that mix. There's a line, and this is a good example of there's ladder fuels underneath these large, beautiful ponderosas. All of these trees are connected to each other. There's ladder fuel connected to it, and then to the, let's see, what direction would this be? This would be to the northeast. I think it's actually straight north up that direction, uphill. It's connected to that rest of the forest that's uphill, as you all know. You probably see it every day. And then it can easily exceed 8-foot flame lengths, especially because it's on a downward slope. So this is an evacuation route for, I think, 3, maybe 4 homes coming down this way. So this would easily be a non-survivable road in a crown fire scenario. The width of the road is about 16 feet. When I talk to folks about roadside thinning, I say you want a 15-foot box of no flammable vegetation at the bare minimum. That's the bare minimum because, like I'm talking about, these flame lengths could exceed 20 feet or 30 feet if the wind is coming down that direction. So it would have to be coming downhill. So the question is, if I'm thinking about making this a bit safer, what would I do? I would start by removing the smaller trees under the larger trees, which is kind of the easiest place to start. And then the next easiest place to start is trimming up any of those residual trees. And then the next hard pill to swallow is that you've got these 5 really nice pondos. They're probably about between 150 to 200 years old, but they're all connected. It creates a dense forest, and it creates an unsafe evacuation scenario. Some of them would have to go. If I were doing this and it was just open space and there weren't any really like homes or aesthetics to consider, just for evacuation and forestry purposes, I would remove these 2 largest trees right there next to the road and maybe consider this 3rd tree as well. To improve the roadside evacuation, roadside safety, or excuse me, the evacuation safety, and to improve the forest health. We generally have a very dense ponderosa pine forest, and that's due to fire suppression over the past century and a half. So this next one, this is also what I'm talking about, where a lot of the roads in the preserve, you don't have a lot of trees hanging over. So this is a good example where one side doesn't, but the other side does. And this, I know for a fact, I looked at the map, this is the preserve open space, and you have some of these smaller trees that are right next to the road. These are, low hanging fruit, some of that small stuff that you could easily remove. And then similarly, these larger trees could be trimmed up just to prevent them from torching. And this would be an evacuation route, maybe for 4 or 5 homes. And then this is the entrance to preserve. Really beautiful, especially with the snow. It's a serene forest. It's why we all live here. But I would definitely recommend pruning at least 10 feet up, or 1/3 the tree height, to reduce the chance of these tree torching, and even consider removing some of these smaller ones. The reason why this is the most pivotal area of the preserve, because this is where everybody has to leave. So imagine any of these trees being on fire. It could prevent you for a time, maybe for 5 to 20 minutes, from passing through there. And that 5 to 20 minutes could be absolutely pivotal, and it could also prevent firefighters from coming into the preserve. And it's such a narrow area between 5 and 10 trees. I didn't get a good count, but about that many could be really significant. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Nancy.
I thank you all for being here. Brian mentioned the campfire in Paradise, California. And if you're interested, there's about a 50-minute frontline presentation on the campfire. And it's very interesting. And one thing that they talk about, there was a firefighter, and he described how he used to come back from a fire and say to his wife, it was really unprecedented conditions. And then he'd come back from the next fire and say, wow, what happened was unprecedented. And you can't really say that anymore. A lot of this is climate change. Our forests are dry. We're getting a lot of wind. And we have to pay attention. Another point that was made in that is if your evacuation plan takes you through wooded areas that could be blocked by fire, that's not an evacuation plan. And if it takes you on narrow roads that are likely to get highly congested, that's not an evacuation plan. Unfortunately, that's what we have in Genesee. And we need to address it. This is evacuation modeling, assuming that the entire fire district gets an evacuation notice at one time. On the right is an assumption, well, first of all, you assume everybody's home and that everybody takes 2 cars. Compare that to the situation on the left where everybody takes 1 car. Takeaway from this is if you are given an evacuation notice, please only take 1 car. Don't try and get both cars out and as much packed as you can. The second big takeaway is that it could take for you guys over 2 hours just to get out of Genesee. What I have taken away from this, and I live down in the southeast corner of Genesee, is that I'm getting out quickly and I'm not necessarily waiting for an evacuation notice. There are many worse things than evacuating when you don't need to. We also all are evacuating to the north. What if the fire is in the north? We have very heavily wooded areas, one right across from the fire station, not owned by Genesee, owned by a woman who lives in Europe. And she has no interest in having it mitigated. If a fire comes up there, it could take out that intersection. We might not be able to get out to the north. And it's one of the reasons why the Fire and Safety Committee, at the request of the board, is looking at, do we need another evacuation route? And what would make the most sense? What would be the priority in terms of looking at that? Third takeaway is you need to be prepared. You don't get an evacuation notice and of course, as soon as you get it, you're panicked and you're not thinking clearly. You should have a go bag packed, ready to go, ready to leave within 5 or 10 minutes of getting an evacuation notice. Next slide. Oh, I guess I have to talk about this. Well, we've already mentioned most of it. The fact that we have areas of non-survivable roadway combined with the fact that it's going to be very congested means that there's a good possibility that stop traffic may be in an area if the fire is actively here that could lead to non-survivable conditions. Next slide. The things that Brian talked about with respect to our private drives and non-survivable roadways also apply to your personal driveway. You want to be sure that if the fire is right there, you can get out of your driveway. You don't want to have any continuity of fuels, as Dory described. Get rid of ladder fuels, and be sure that emergency responders, either before a fire or if you have a medical emergency or post-fire, knows what your address is. And there are many, many homes that are virtually impossible to find because you can't see their addresses. And you want those addresses to be reflective and on structures that are not going to burn. Next slide. This is from the preserve an example of a roadway where, or a private driveway where there could be an issue if the fire were there of getting out of that driveway. So you can see that the branches of the trees pretty much converge across the driveway. And there's also a need to do some limbing up. There are grasses that I see on the right side, and flame, if the flame height goes up high, could involve the branches of that tree and the tree. Next slide. So being prepared. Number one, be sure you get an emergency evacuation notice. Jefferson County uses code red. It is that they automatically include landlines, although not necessarily if it's a VoIP landline, and does not include cell phones or emails unless you register them. So you can go to your911.net, easy to remember, and sign up every device and every mechanism you want to get a notification through. In the Marshall Fire, a lot of people didn't get an evacuation notice because they didn't know they had to opt into getting them. If you have a caregiver at home for kids or for elderly, be sure that they're registered with code red as well. Have an emergency, family emergency plan. You may not all be at home. You may be scattered around. Have a default place where you will meet. It's possible that cell phone towers will be down depending upon where the fire is and how severe it is. And so you may not be able to communicate with each other. So decide in advance where you're going to meet. Talk to your neighbors, discuss your safety concerns, be backups for each other if you have kids at home or elderly at home or pets at home that would need to be evacuated. And be prepared to leave immediately, especially if it's a red flag day. Next slide. So I got a little ahead of myself. This is an example of things that you should have in a go bag ready to go. This comes from a brochure that was developed by the Rotary Wildfire Ready group out of Evergreen. And it's been vetted by firefighters. And this is just one example of the kinds of things that you should have. This brochure, you can download it from online. There are also hard copies of it at the foundation office when you go in the door before you actually go into the office. You can pick one up there. Anecdotally, people often forget cell phone chargers. You'll take your cell phone, but not a charger. It's worth buying an extra one and having it in your go bag ready to go. If there are last minute things that you can get in a minute or two, have a list of those so that, because trust me, you won't be thinking clearly when you have to evacuate. And on the next slide, the back side of this talks about what you should wear. Nothing synthetic. Synthetic materials melt and they will burn you. So you want cotton, blue jeans, heavy boots, a hat. If you've got goggles, it could be very smoky. And I should go back and say, when we did that evacuation modeling, I was thinking, well, that's worst case, the entire district at once and 2 cars per house. But that doesn't include the panic that people will feel. It doesn't include how smoky it might be, how visibility might be affected, etc. So it's really not worst case. And then this also has a very useful list of things. If you're getting a prepare to evacuate notification and you have time, things you can do on the outside of your home and on the inside of your home, all of which will increase the chances it has to survive and help firefighters. But don't take the time if you've gotten the evacuate immediately notice. There are places to get information, and I would like to particularly call out My Mountain Town, mymountaintown.com. The woman who runs that is very well connected with the emergency community, and usually has the most up-to-date information. I went there even for the Marshall Fire because I trust her to get information. Jefferson County used to have a robust way of communicating emergency information, and they really don't anymore. Next slide.
This is
Becky.
Becky's.
Hello, everyone. I'm Becky Smith, member of the Fire and Safety Committee and also resident of Genesee. Normally at this point in the presentation, I try and get you to sign up for neighborhood walks. But thanks to the leadership and initiative of your neighbor, Will, you've already had the walk, and I thank you very much for that. I thank you for having that initiative and all of you who participated. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot. We don't normally have the opportunity to talk to neighbors after the walk, so I would really appreciate it if you would go into the chat, if you participated in the walk, and share what you, maybe the most important thing you think you learned, or the biggest impact, the facts that you learned, and what concerns you the most. I think we would benefit from learning that from you. In the meantime, I want to talk about what might be next. You know, if you want to do more and if you want to learn more, there's a lot of things you can do. Some of the neighborhoods who've had the walks have, you know, in the following weekends, they just send out an email and say, hey, we're going to get together and help this person limb up their trees or mow their yard or rake their pine needles. And they've even done that for several weeks in a row. So
Sorry.
no problem. That's a great way to get stuff done quickly. You know, many hands make light work, and it really is surprising how much you can get done. And it's also an opportunity for you guys to get together and have those conversations that Nancy was just talking about. You know, get to know each other's situations, know if they have a pet or if they have latchkey kids, and just maybe talk about how you can help each other in the case of an emergency. You do have some open space in the preserve, and if there's areas there that also need attention, you can get in touch with Brian and he'll set the parameters. He'll tell you what you can and can't do, but generally speaking, you know, the foundation appreciates your help. So if there's areas that have trees like you see on this slide that need some attention on open space, you know, you can do that. And like Dory said, like we've said throughout this presentation, there are things you can do that will make a difference. And it's just a couple hours. You know, you could probably go out this weekend. It's supposed to be pretty nice and get some stuff done. And so I just encourage you to do that. One last thing I was going to mention. I know that I think there's at least 3 of you who've adopted a hydrant in the preserve, but there are other hydrants that need to be adopted. And, you know, it's just as simple as shoveling around it when there's snow and cutting the grass when it's long. So I encourage you to go on the fire district's website and adopt a hydrant. The ambassador program that's mentioned on this slide is not something that's fully fleshed out yet, but I'm just going to mention it real quick. Since you guys have had your walk and a lot of you have shown interest, this is something that Dory is developing, and it's going to be an opportunity for you to stay involved and for you to get additional training. And in return, I think you're probably going to be asked to help spread that training. You'll have an opportunity to help organize events and help with just public awareness events throughout Genesee. So if you're interested, Dory, should they go ahead and volunteer now, or should we wait until we get, there'll be more details coming out in the Genesee, in the e-blasts, in the weekly e-blasts. If you don't get the Genesee emails every week, call the office and put your email on the list so that you can learn about the ambassador program. And finally, I have Dory's email on here again, just to remind you, if you haven't had your home assessment, that's where you get the detail. That's where you get all the information of what you can do to make your house as safe as possible. You know, she looks at vents, she looks at cracks, she looks at doors and windows and all the trees on your lot. And she takes into account the slope around your house and just tells you really everything you need to do to make your house as safe as possible. Next slide, please. This last slide is just a list of resources. We've mentioned a lot of these, and I think Dory is going to give you a link so that you can go to a Google Doc so that you don't have to copy all of this down. But if you want to learn more, then there are a lot of good resources out there. All right, so I'm going to hand it back to Dory.
All right. Thanks so much, Becky. I appreciate it. I did put the link in the chat box, and I will put it in again before we end this evening. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to ask everyone to take a 6-question poll. It's all multiple choice, and it's just about this presentation. And we'd really like you to, it's going to take literally less than 5 minutes, you to be honest and tell us what you think. And then as you fill it out, if you think of things we did not cover, put it in the chat box. Is there something we didn't tell you? So all you have to do is make your choice. You, along the side, you're able to scroll down and let us know. So please. Again, please, if there's something you want to hear about that we're not covering, put it in the chat box. Got a lot of good resources on with us this evening. Let's get those questions answered. Is pretty good participation. We are at about the 2-minute mark. And so I'll see the percentage that has completed the poll, and I'll stop probably in about another minute. So.
I don't see the poll.
Okay, so usually what happens is if your Zoom has not been updated, it might not show up. Are you on a computer, iPad?
Computer.
Okay, Brian, isn't that what it usually means if it's not updated?
Is anybody else not having trouble seeing it?
Yeah, that's why I stopped doing the advanced ones. Usually, Carla.
Sometimes it's hiding behind your Zoom window, so move that window around and see if it isn't behind it.
Yeah, yeah. Let us know if you find it, Carla. No? For me, it just pops right up in the middle, so.
Well, somebody else can can have my proxy.
Okay, thanks for looking.
I think your
All
answers
right.
are going to be all yes, except maybe for the last one.
Okay, all right, so I'm gonna end the poll unless somebody wants to say, I'm not done. Okay, I'm gonna end it. Thank you for participating and I really appreciate it. Again, that's just a way that we can see how we can, let's see, sorry, I'm doing something else. So anyway, help improve our presentation. So anyhow, yeah. So now we're at the fun part. We're going to take your questions and we're going to answer them. And hopefully we get all the answers you want. So Faith, the recording will be on the Genesee Fire Rescue website, or it will be on the foundation website. You can get it either place. Sorry, Chris.
No, that's fine. So
Sorry, how quickly
Yeah.
do you normally get that posted?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, I usually do it the next day. I usually try and get everybody the recording, you know, that day is usually I try.
So I'm Chris Garlasco, and I'm on the Fire and Safety Committee. And just say a couple words before we jump into the questions. The Fire and Safety Committee has put a lot of work into the fire and safety pages of our Genesee website. And we've coordinated with Dory, so a lot of the information that's on the Genesee Fire District website is all included on our Genesee Foundation website. So anytime you have a question, I know that Brian and Dory are happy to take your question, but I think you'll find a lot of those resources when you go to our Genesee Foundation site and click on those pages. All the resources you saw in the flyer that we emailed out to you yesterday and that we put on in this presentation tonight are on there. The links to the recordings for this presentation, and maybe if you're curious, some of the other neighborhood areas are all on the website. And the PowerPoint itself is also on the website. So we try to make it really easy. If it's a rainy afternoon, you can go search for all this stuff. It's there. So we have a few questions that right out the bat were great questions. And I think teeing a couple of these up for Brian to explain a little bit more about the passive fire and the crown fire and that 15-foot box a little bit more.
Sure. So yeah, and I think that passive crown fire question came up when Dory was doing her part, and she actually had an explanation on her slide, but it was kind of hard to read when she's moving on to the next slide. But passive crown fire on her slide, it says patches of stand torching, but fire spread mainly through surface fuel. So it's just a way to describe a fire basically that is not a rip roaring crown fire yet. And that's usually because the wind hasn't picked up yet. So it's mostly a torching fire that's still creeping around on the ground. And if the wind becomes conducive to a crown fire, it can easily become so. So that's the explanation of a passive fire. And so all of that too is in the maps that Dory was talking about. To understand it better, it's all on the CWPP on the Genesee Fire website. And then Will asked about the 15-foot box. So Will now actually say just not from the center line, from just imagining a 15-foot box. So if the road is 24 foot wide, then the box is within the road. It's the bare minimum that I just use as an example. And the reason being, there are a lot of roads in Genesee, and again, where I live in Evergreen, where it's very narrow. If you've ever been down Juniper Court, that's my example. Usually Juniper is in the southwestern part of Genesee. It's like a 14-foot road and it's covered by trees. It's like beautiful, and it's a lot of maybe why folks move to Colorado into this area, but it's also a really dangerous area. So that's what I use as the bare minimum, a 15-foot box with no flammable vegetation.
We've got another question. This comes up pretty regularly. Do we have a list of contractors that can do some of this home hardening work?
Well, if I was reading correctly, I think they were also talking about, like with the recommendations and things that I make. I know that Wildfire Prepared does have a list of contractors that understand the report. Again, as far as replacing screens and those kinds of things, we don't. I mean, it's like if you have a handyman person to explain those things to, but no, we really need some. I have not come across any.
Although I think what we're finding is more and more contractors that are getting called to do work up here are quickly learning what some of the criteria are just from the scope of work. So we would expect to see some of them starting to advertise that they also are familiar with fire mitigation issues.
Can I just add that Jeffco in the last year and a half has updated its building code. And if you replace siding, if you replace a deck, if you replace a roof, it has to be fire resistant material. If you pull a permit for something outside of your house, like a deck, it used to be that as long as you didn't increase the area by more than 399 square feet, you didn't have to create, you weren't required to create defensible space. Now, anytime you pull a permit to replace a deck with exactly what's there except fire resistant, you will be required to create defensible space in order to get a certificate of occupancy.
Yeah,
Or in order to get.
thank you, Nancy. And we've got a good question from Ms. Stephen about our slash pickups and distinct pickup events versus the 5-bag limit for our weekly contractors. Brian, do you want to take what our latest is?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple different things in there. We do our slash pickup once a year, and Dory is going to do a slash drop off for the fire protection district this year. She got grant money to do that. So that's really cool. And there's no limit on the slash for the drop off or the pickup when we do it. When the GFL is a trash company in Genesee, they say you can put out a bundle of sticks that are tied together. I wouldn't really call that slash necessarily. It's got to be a bit smaller. Usually when folks are doing stuff that doesn't coincide with our slash pickup, I tell them, if you can, fit it in your trash can as much as you can, break it down. That's actually what I do here in Evergreen. Or Jeffco during the year I think from May through October, they do a slash drop off every weekend somewhere else in the county. And Dory's working with the county to try to get one that will be closer to Genesee Foundation, closer with, or possibly within the district. Right now, the closest, I know they did one at Lookout Mountain last year. I can't remember exactly where, some community area. So look for that. And then the bag, so we do pine needle bag pickup. And last year we did it, we set a limit of 15 when we do our pickup, but every week on Thursday or Friday, whenever your trash pickup is, you can put out 5 bags. And that's the limit set by GFL right now.
Maybe Brian, talk a little bit about mowing, this idea of keeping those ladder fuels down low, and both on your private property and on open space.
Yeah, so when Dory comes and does a home assessment, when she starts talking about vegetation, she'll recommend mowing all of your front yard, your backyard, basically within 30 feet of your home if you own that 30 feet out. You want to prevent any flammable fuels leading up to your house, and keeping grass down to 4 inches is the best way you can do that, along with all the other stuff she'll recommend. And so, like I mentioned, and Dory mentioned this too, we have overlapping ignition zones. So you might own just 10 feet out, and then your neighbor owns that next 20 feet, or the preserve open space owns that. So that would be a conversation among you all with Floyd, who manages your preserve, and your board, if you want to allow folks to mow grass on on the preserve open space that goes out into your defensible space. That is something we are going to be doing for the larger Genesee Foundation. We're implementing a policy, drafting a policy so that folks can do that. There's some, as you can imagine, we live in a litigious society, so it's not as easy as telling folks, yeah, take that lawnmower or take that chainsaw out on property that you don't own. That's not the scenario. We have to put it through the filters of our lawyers and make a policy and have a waiver and all that kind of stuff. But that's what we want folks to be able to do. We want it to be relatively easy so that folks can mow grasses on your evacuation route or your defensible space that overlaps with other property that's not yours.
What about when we redo our decks, we look at replacing siding, things like that. Is Trex not flammable at all? Is that hardy board siding? Is that pretty protective? Dory, what are some of the things from your fire experience dealing with those materials?
Well, they're not 100%, but definitely a very good barrier. And, you know, it's also maintenance, right? You know, we can get those great things put on there, but they still have to be maintained, right? We still have to clean the things off and whatnot. Yeah, you know, you can look at studies that have come out about fire and see the decks and those kinds of things. As far as which particular product, I don't recommend one over the other, you know, so that's not, yeah, because that's not my expertise. Sorry.
They're listed as fire resistant, not
Correct.
fireproof.
Proof. Right.
And many of the composite materials for decks, for example, will in all likelihood melt rather than burn.
That is true.
Will, you asked a good question about the assessment, that the report that Dory provides you is between, you know, it's your personal property is not available. But then you said, what about all this information about that's here in the CWPP about your neighborhood? How is that available and discoverable?
Yep, but so is everybody else's. So, yep.
And it's the CWPP, and Evergreen has a CWPP, and Elk Creek has a CWPP, and those are all public documents.
Yep.
We also have had extensive discussions about insurance and what insurers look at, and they have their own sources of information. There's nothing that we have discovered that they don't already know. And they really aren't interested in mining for additional. They feel that they have enough information. The benefit of doing something like a wildfire prepared assessment is that if you do what you need to do and you get a certificate, you may very well see lower insurance rates.
And I add one more thing to that, Chris. And Will, it's a really good point that you bring that up. And like Nancy mentioned, insurance companies, they have all the information that they need. And I'll also add, I throw this out that Genesee is in the top 90 percentile of high risk WUI areas in the country. And that's found on a public website published by the United States Forest Service called wildfirerisk.org. And I just found it again, and it says that Genesee is 97% of communities in Colorado and top 90th percentile of the country. So the information's there, the risk is clearly there, and it's pretty public.
Okay, thank you.
I will mention to you something that's wasn't part of this presentation, but I attended a very interesting seminar put out by the CAI, the Community Associations Group, where they talked to people on boards, community managers about insurance. And it goes, you know, both for our foundation, for us to know more about how to make sure that our common properties are properly insured. But I can't say it enough that after the past couple of fires, Waldo Canyon and Black Forest, and now the Marshall Fire, the groups have discovered a tremendous amount of practical advice about where in people's insurance was not adequate. So don't hesitate to sit down with your insurer and go through all those various riders and exclusions that you might be facing with your policy. You might have a pretty bare bones structure that sounded really good when he quoted the prices to you. But when you talk about being able to cover the cost of debris removal in the event of an emergency, or the cost of rebuilding, but now you have to meet new building codes, things like that, there's actually riders or parts of your policy that will cover all those things. So try to put a little reminder down when you have some extra time, and give your agent a call and check on some of those things.
I'd recommend first watching this video that's a little less than an hour, put out by United Policy Holders, which is a consumer group. And it's called something like, Does Your Safety Net Have Holes? And it instructs you how to read your policy, where to find certain things, what to look for, based on a lot of people's problems that they've had. So it'll really orient you about what kinds of questions to ask your agent. And there's a link to it on the foundation website, right, Chris? Yeah.
Yes.
And probably also on the Genesee Fire website.
There's a comment from Stephen, and maybe it's worth reiterating. Brian, you might have read this, that big problem is disposal of all this debris and slash. Maybe mention one more time how much the foundation understands this and is working on programs to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a top-down problem. So the state has been talking about biomass for a while now. And when I say biomass, I mean, what do you do? It's easy to cut a tree, but what do you do with all the stuff that makes up a tree? You can't just leave it there, then you're not doing a whole lot for the fire risk. And so for the county, I think they are doing a really good job with their slash program, their slash drop-off program. It's something pretty unique. You'd see that in California. And then also our fire districts, Evergreen has been doing their own thing for a while. Now Genesee Fire Protection District, now that they have Dory on board, she's making moves on that. So at the foundation level, I deal with this when I do forestry projects. It's a big problem. Where do I put all this stuff? And oftentimes it's just one of 5 different solutions, either paying someone to get rid of it, chipping it back onto the land, chipping it into a dumpster, chipping it into a dump trailer, and then dumping it somewhere in the city where somebody wants chips. It's just figuring it out. It's a very expensive problem. And so our slash program, it's the cost for it for that one, it takes about 4 days to pick everything up. It's between $12,000 and $15,000. That's a pretty hefty budget for that one-time pickup. So it's not something we're looking to expand at this point. And that's why it's great that Dory's doing it. And so then you're talking about GFL. We've actually had conversations with GFL about expanding that. They've said no, unless we pay them more, but even that probably wouldn't solve the problem because they have a capacity issue as well. So just doing Genesee Foundation trash pickup takes, I think, 3 trucks a full day, something along those lines. And even if we did pay them a certain amount, that's not a guarantee that they'd be able to take more. We're talking to them about doing the pine needle pickup so that we can increase our capacity on that. That's still a question of cost. So it's not, there's no easy answer there for what we can do on it. I'm always open to suggestions because just biomass disposal is a problem that everybody has.
I do think that as a Genesee resident, if you feel that you need more support, that you need more than one slash pickup a year, write to the board. And it's a matter of money, it's a matter of priorities, but that's the best way to get additional help in terms of slash removal.
We didn't
One
talk a
topic.
lot about the grant programs. Brian, what's happening with grants?
Sure. So in the past, and we've had defensible space grants in the past. And Nancy's been pivotal in that. The Fire and Safety Committee have done that. So Genesee Foundation applies to the Colorado State Forest Service to get funding for forestry projects and defensible space. And that funding would cover up to 50% in the form of a reimbursement. And that's just for tree removal and flammable vegetation removal. We applied for a grant in 2021. We did not get it. And pretty sure it's because the one-off defensible space, so one project on Tamarack Drive and one project on Sand Lily Drive, scattered throughout the foundation, it doesn't cut their standard. It doesn't meet their standard of strategic focus area. Although Genesee, as I mentioned, we're in a very high risk area, doing those one-offs is not fitting what they want. So we didn't get grant money. We're applying again. We're going to try to identify areas like groups of homes that want to participate in a defensible space grant. And it would require, 3 or 4 homes together doing a defensible space project. And a defensible space project is removing the trees that you have to remove. It's not choosing the 1 or 2 trees. It's removing all the trees that according to the Colorado State Forest Service guidelines. So we are going to apply for that again. We have to identify groups of homes first. But that's the plan. And as far as other sources of funding, there are no existing funding sources for a single landowner, or excuse me, a single homeowner to do a defensible space project to help you pay for that, $5,000 to $10,000 cost. It has to be through an entity. The other thing you can do is get a break on your state income taxes. It's not property taxes. It's not Fed taxes. It's your state income taxes. You can apply for I think it's called Income 65. And if you can get up to $2,500 back, or rather cut, I forget how it works actually chronologically.
Cut from your income.
From your income, state
It's
income.
not a credit against what you owe. It's.
Thank you. Not the best with taxes.
But,
I can send you the document.
I had a friend that just sent me a note the other day that said, thank you very much. It turned out to be a significant amount of money for us. So, it depends upon you and your accountant, or you and your software, and take a look at that, because if you're spending money on mitigation, even a tax subtraction or a income subtraction, that can be helpful.
And also let the Fire and Safety Committee know what kind of support you would like. We've talked about, there is an amazing number of people that have firewood piles that they inherited, that came with the property, that they don't use, or they had firewood and then replaced a wood burning fireplace with a gas fireplace. And if there was a call for it, we could organize, maybe not pay for it, but organize having a contractor go to the houses that had stuff that they needed to get rid of and schlep it from wherever it was, put it in trucks, and then the people who took advantage of it could share in the cost of it. Similarly, if there were a lot of people who wanted to do the 0 to 5 feet non-flammable rock crushed, what did you call it, Dory, crushed gravel, we could organize a larger community effort and take advantage of some cost reduction because of that. And I should say that the grant that Brian was talking about, it's all tree work. It doesn't really involve what you need to do in the first 5 feet of the house unless you have a tree there or a shrub.
So we're almost at the end of our time. I see 13 of the 32 houses in the preserve represented, so pretty good representation for an evening. Brian Bardwell had brought up something that was also brought up at the working group meeting, and that's the timing of cutting of trees, that we might be a little bit off time, maybe too late in the year for cutting trees for those that were just limbing up. So you might look at that. And I think you can anticipate for this spring's slash pickup that the volume is going to be significantly greater than you've seen in the past, because now everybody's sensitized to it. And I know in the preserve, we realize that we have a lot of work to do now. So heads up for that.
Dory, let me pass it back to you.
Okay. All right. So again, in the chat box earlier, I did put that link. I will put it again. So all you have to do is click on it. It will take you to the foundation website. It will take you to how you can contact me, Brian. There's all kinds of things on there. Please check it out. I've included a report in there, a podcast about the findings from Paradise. That was a really good podcast, about 40 minutes. Yeah, so we just really appreciate that you were here. Again, if there was anything we did not touch upon that you think we should have, put it in the chat box. Reach out with your questions. Yeah, thank you for your participation. It's been really great. So, all right, look for